Hey guys, so I am back again just to share a little bit about, how I feel about abuse and love and how they really can't coexist naturally in a relationship unless you find excuses to make them fit. So, one thing that I want to talk about, especially growing up in a Black household and growing up being Black, we're kind of taught that abuse is what it is, and we're never really taught alternative methods to to discipline not only our children but as forms of punishment. What we're used to is seeing abuse, and this stems all the way from slavery. This is what we have grown in our DNA, literally, to accept as acceptable behavior. And on the flip side, the people who abused us back then are seeing that it is very detrimental, and they wouldn't even, they wouldn't do that to their children. So this is something that we have to keep in mind when we are making excuses for love and abuse existing in our lives. So one thing I want to talk about is as it pertains to growing up. So when we grow up, I don't know about y'all, but I experienced whoopings as a child. And, I was always told it was just normal. Like it was just something that just happens, and you're alive, so you should be okay with it. You should be fine with it. And it's something that is actually very detrimental to a lot of people's mental state that they don't even realize it. I was in a discussion with a group, and one woman said that that she actually was beaten as a child, and she said there's no way that I would allow anyone to beat me. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind, is that is actually a defense mechanism from your childhood pains and your childhood traumas, so you don't endure that pain anymore. So one thing that I want to recognize with abuse and love as it pertains to children, because abuse is so simultaneous with our nurturing nature as our parenting skills are, we don't really have that say so to where the line it gets blurry. So when you understand that love comes from a nurturing place, it comes from a kind place, it's hard to find excuses for abuse to happen naturally, So what we do is we make room for abuse to be acceptable in our lives because we have endured so much love from our parents, so much care from our parents, but every once in a while, we would get abused to be straightened up, if you understand what I'm saying. So making excuses as a child in your mind to excuse abuse happening to you is something that we have to start to recognize, especially when we're growing as people and we're growing into adults and we're growing into adult relationships. Because the things that we have to understand are everything from our childhood, it's programmed within us, and it forms who we are. It literally forms our personality, and it forms who we eventually become, unless we go through life checking everything that we've learned. So unless we literally sit and check ourselves and understand that this type of behavior that I endured was not necessarily the best, so I'm not going to endure it anymore, or this behavior wasn't necessarily the most helpful for my mental state, so I'm not going to execute this onto others or onto my children or even onto myself. Because a lot of times we abuse ourselves and neglect ourselves and don't even realize it as well. So it's not just projecting it onto other people, it's taking it in and neglecting ourselves as well. So the one thing that we have to do about love is personally define it for ourselves, because Love means so many different things to different people, because if you walk into someone's situation where they're being abused by their husband, they still think that they are in a loving relationship. It just gets hard sometimes, if you understand what I'm saying. So love for me is high vibrational all the time. And love for me is something that is consistent day after day. It's not something that is love sometimes and some days it's not. Because for me personally, when on the days that it's not, that's when things need to be addressed and things need to be checked, and we have to get back to that loving state that we desire to be in. So one thing that you have to understand, especially going into these codependent relationships and these abusive relationships, like I said, I was in one already. And one thing you have to really recognize is that a lot of our acceptance of these relationships and these behaviors have to stem from what we endured as children and what we endured in our social groups growing up. Because not all abuse is physical abuse. And we have to realize that some of us endure emotional abuse and like the pettiness and all that stuff from girl groups in order to be accepted and in order to have a circle of friends, if you understand what I'm saying. So once you recognize the energies that you have allowed back then, you start to recognize just how much abuse you have been enduring just for the sake of endurance. And one thing you have to really check yourself with is the fact that everyone's definition of love is different, means that you have to have discernment with who you allow into your life and into your circle, especially when you have kids and when you have younger kids as well. So because the definition of love is so blurry and it's really only like seen as like this in a romantic way, we have to reevaluate what exactly love is, because love has such a broad spectrum, especially with different types of relationships, like love between a mother and a son, love between a husband and wife, love between a grandparent and the parent. These things are these lines get blurry sometimes, and because we don't have definitive definitions of what love is in each of these categories, love is just a word that just keeps getting thrown out there. So it allows this narcissistic cycle of abuse to be inserted in, just because they say that they still love you at the end of the day, or they hurt you because it like for your own good in a sense, or hurt you because it's something that you made them do, because you triggered them to give you that pain. And one thing I want you to know, if you are in an abusive relationship or you have been in the past, someone physically abusing you or mentally abusing you has nothing to do with you and has everything to do with who they are as a person. You can't further blame yourself for something that someone chooses to do to you in response to how they make you feel, if you understand what I'm saying. So when someone tries to put a blanket over abuse, whether it is physical, mental, does not matter. When they try to blanket over it and give excuses for their behavior, that's when you have to sit and reevaluate what exactly love is to you. And if that's something that you're willing to accept, then you have to sit and you have to accept that this is what you want. But as I grow and as I learn, and as I, remove myself from those situations and from those relationships, one thing I know is that that type of love is not something that I'm willing to accept at all from anyone. And we have to recognize this ongoing cycle of abuse that is known about in the Black community, but never really spoken about, just because of just the magnitude of which it is. So with the abuse that we've endured as a culture, we never had a chance to really sit and heal from those pains, because what happened to us, what happened to our bloodlines during slavery, is still ever so present in how we treat others that look like us, and how we treat our family members and our friends as well. So until we heal that, and until we recognize that loving your abuser, in a sense, and making excuses for the abuse is not a definition of love that you want. Once you consciously make that decision, you have to then reevaluate every aspect of your life and see where exactly you let people slide on, or where you get the privilege of sliding when you are the aggressor. Because not all the time we realize that we are perpetuating these things to other people. So sometimes we are the abuser, and we are the giver and not the receiver, and we have to sit and recognize that for ourselves as well. Because so many times I, run into relationships where, on the outside looking in, where the guy is enduring so much mental abuse. The woman is constantly belittling him, berating him, and then he finally has enough, and he hits the other woman. And these are two different levels of abuse, but these are still abusive cycles, and these are still abusive cycles that we are accepting as love that is good enough, in a sense. Because if we had a definition of love, if in that situation, the guy who was being verbally abused, if he had a definition of love that did not include abuse, if his definition of love included just high vibrational love all the time and not enduring verbal abuse from a woman, he would have left already. So it's one of those things that with trauma bonding, with not defining love and not understanding what love means to us, it allows abusive cycles to continue, and it allows abuse to permeate into our lives and into our realities. So one thing that we have to do, not only as a culture, but as an adult, is recognize what exactly was acceptable behavior for us growing up, and what exactly was detrimental to our mental state and to our growing and to our spiritual nurturement. Because a lot of us were just given just the basic care. We were given clean clothes, food, shelter, things like that, but we were never really spoken to. Our thoughts were never understood. Our thoughts were never nurtured. Our talents were never nurtured. We were just being, in a sense. We never really had a chance to endure a love that was forgiving, a love that was open and honest, and a love that was from a nurturing place, and not necessarily a place that came with a cycle of verbal or physical abuse. Because I know too many times where we make excuses for our parents being upset and taking the anger out on us, and us just being like, oh, that's just what it is. That's just my mom. That's just what it is. And once we recognize that, this behavior is not necessarily something that I want to accept as an adult, that's when we start to rework our friendships, when we rework our relationships as well, and we can start to rework the relationships that we have with our children. So one thing that we really have to do is not demonize our parents, because they are coming from a place where they were probably enduring abuse as well. So if this is all that you know, then that's all that you know. But we are living in a society where we literally have phones, we have computers at our fingertips, and we understand what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So we can't necessarily keep blaming our parents for the abuse that we continue to endure as adults, because we have these open things, we have these open sources, we have free access to so much, And we have to make the conscious decision to want to change and to want to remove these abusive cycles from our lives. So when we take the time out to sit with ourselves and understand what is acceptable and what is not, because some people still accept abuse as okay, whether it be physical or verbal, because their parents did it to them and they came out fine. So if you came out fine, then do you, boo. But one thing about me is that I'm always open to growth. I'm always open to learning, and I'm always open to developing my personal skills, not only with my relationships with other people, but now I have a child of my own. So I'm open to further expanding ways of communicating with her and letting her understand that in no way, shape, or form is abuse an acceptable thing that goes with love. They're two different concepts, and so many times the lines get so blurry, and a part of it is really our social groups growing up, because our social groups are such diverse groups. We have people who come from the suburbs, coming to our schools, and people from the hood. So it's like, we have like this mix of personalities that come together and that help us shape who we are growing up. So with this idea of wanting to be accepted and being nurtured and cared after in our social groups, we sometimes take on these abusive ideals, especially men and Black men, because one thing I notice about Black men is they accept the toxic masculinity behavior in order to be accepted by males, their male peers. And if that's the general idea, the general census of how you should walk, act, talk, and behave, and given that a lot of Black people that I know, Black men, did not grow up with a father in a home, what they do is they piggyback ideas off of their social groups. So if this is the only idea that you have in your social groups, this is the idea that you're going to continue to accept and continue to perpetuate throughout your life. So we have to all step back. We have to all think back to these ideas that we learned as children, as teenagers, as in elementary school, all of these things. We have to sit back and we have to realize that with self-analysis comes growth. And with growth comes change. And when you change, you end up changing for the better. So one thing that we have to do is really sit and realize what do we define as love and what do we define as abuse? Because once you start to have those conversations, you'll begin to realize that a lot of people have different ideas and different views on what exactly it is. So there's a difference between nurturing, caring, and developing spiritual growth and being detrimental to your mental health, your mental state, and your physical state. So you have to understand where the line blurs and who you blur it for in your relationships and in your partnerships and even your relationships with your children, because these things are going to keep cycling and keep revolving, not only in our household, but in our communities as well. So when you take time to sit with yourself, especially, like I said, Black men, because a lot of Black men that I know, like I said, I'm speaking for myself, they all have the general same ideas. They don't really necessarily value the essence of a woman because they are so used to using them, emotionally abusing them and manipulating them just for the sake of getting their dick wet, So these ideologies are permeating throughout our minds, and it's also engraved in our every essence of our being. So from how you treat the woman at the corner store to how you treat your mother to how you treat your sister, we we say things like, I forgot what exactly I posted, but it was somewhere on the lines of, you know, a guy will be mad at someone else for trying to play their daughter, but they're still actively playing someone's daughter, you know? So it's something that we have to really sit with and see, why is it okay for you to play with a woman's heart, but it's not okay for someone to play with your daughter's heart, because that's a woman as well. So it's these ideas, these blurred lines of love and abuse, that we still try to find ways to make the abuse acceptable, maybe for one person but not the other. And it's that inconsistency that causes blurred lines, and that causes people to think that love is anything other than nurturing. So when we have these sit down conversations with ourselves and with our families, we have to really sit and we have to realize that once we define what love is for us, everyone who does not fall into that category and cannot give it to us has to be removed. Because if you don't, you will always make an excuse for that abusive behavior to come in and creep in and change your ideas of what exactly love is. So I'm just going to leave you guys with that. I will be coming back just to further explain, because I know it was a lot. I kind of bounced all over the place. But I will be back in a little while just to clarify everything for you.